Yeah, sorry, when I was recording, I didn't get your wave to both of you. I know it's upsetting. Good morning, everyone. All right, so
Good
today,
morning.
thanks, Josh. Good, good. Josh is amongst the living. It's not his nap time yet. While you're at it, go ahead and wake up Michael because he's kind of moving, but that could be a dream. All right, so today we are talking a little bit about the Revolutionary War and specifically the documents that you went over, at least theoretically, in your assignment from the other day. So I'm going to share my screen again, just kind of get started, and I'm going to breeze through these a little bit. So if you have questions, please ask. Okay. So here we go. Remember, you were supposed to theoretically have done this assignment here. Okay, and so this assignment that you had to go through, give me the most important line from these 4 documents or the most important part of the image of the Boston Massacre. I know that was a little confusing, but bottom line is you were supposed to kind of go through and give me a line. Somebody was like, hey, can I just copy and paste this? Yeah, this part right here could have been copied and pasted. If, as I'm going through this, you realize, oh man, I didn't do this quite right, and you want me to return it before grading it, so you can fix a couple of things, that's fine. But bottom line is this column needed to be something from the document. It doesn't need to be a direct quote. You can certainly paraphrase. But that was what the column was supposed to be. Column B was supposed to be the purpose of the document or artwork. So I believe yesterday it was Sapphire was saying, is that kind of like the point of view audience type stuff from the AP? She was absolutely correct. Column B, that's kind of, who were they talking to? Who were they attempting to get, attention and swayed onto their side, if you will. And then the effect on our history was kind of your mentality regarding whether or not this had a strong effect on who we are as a culture. Okay. The bottom line is you had all of this from this website right here. And this Google site kind of gave you links to each one of the documents, and I want to go through them very briefly. Now, I do want to make sure you understand that you should be watching the videos that I create. You can't just kind of skip out on those. Those are technically what you're supposed to be doing for this class. You're supposed to do a certain amount of work per week, and I realize that some of you kind of neglect to do that. It's very easy to tell on a YouTube video whether or not people are watching it based upon the amount of views. Yesterday it had 1, so good work, that one person. The rest of you should be logging on and at least going through it, just to understand the background information. But basically, I did go over a little bit about the Boston Massacre, and this image right here, this image was created by Paul Revere. Paul Revere was a silversmith in Boston, and he was a member of the Sons of Liberty. Now, the Sons of Liberty, of course, were the group of people that were protesting the British policies all throughout the 1760s, pretty much starting around the time of the Stamp Act, really before that, the Sugar Act, and was led by men like Sam Adams. And Paul Revere was part of that, and he was part of the propaganda campaign to basically paint the British in a bad light. And had you watched that video, I took great pains to talk about how in the reality, and they kind of give you a version, and do realize right now we have no idea what really happened at the Boston Massacre, because there are about 30 different views and different firsthand accounts, if you will. All we can do is kind of put the hodgepodge of different things together and hope for the best. But bottom line is, at the Boston Massacre, there was a confusion between the crowd, which was daring these soldiers to fire, daring them to fire into the crowd. That's pretty gutsy if you think about it. If you're standing in front of a guy with a loaded gun, screaming, "Go ahead and fire, you traitors, you this, you that." The folks at the Boston Massacre were pretty committed to their cause, because they were literally telling guys with loaded guns to go ahead and shoot them. And then when they obliged, they immediately went, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that." So you want to talk about some pretty weird, kind of what did you expect kind of moments. But in the actual, I can't wait for the chat here. I'm sure it's useful stuff. Okay, gentlemen over in the other class, you are going to be removed from the Zoom if we continue to be as special as you normally are. Bottom line is, the Boston Massacre is depicted by Paul Revere here in this engraving as if these folks over on the left don't have any weapons and they're not, aggressive in any way, shape, or form. And so, sure enough, when the soldiers fire into them, the propaganda that Paul Revere is kind of pointing out here is that these folks were just peaceful protesters, didn't have any reason to get shot. And then he also, the key here is depicts Thomas Preston, the captain, behind his soldiers, which is not what happened. And John Adams takes great pains to point that out during the actual trial that comes out afterwards. Okay. And so bottom line is the Boston Massacre is a pretty pivotal event in 1770, but it's played up probably more egregious than it really was by people like Paul Revere. Okay, and so this artwork ends up being a pretty important piece of propaganda in the fight against the British. Now, keep in mind that happened in 1770. We're still 5 years away from the first shots of the actual American Revolution at Lexington and Concord. So in that time period, we start building up towards revolution. Those that are already committed have decided that they are going to be revolutionaries. So Sam Adams is absolutely on board. But if, again, I keep referring, if you watch the video that I produced, every single one of these people has a different thing that pushes them over the edge. Franklin isn't immediately an American. He still considers himself very British when he's a colonial agent over in London. You have John Adams, the cousin of Sam Adams, who defends the soldiers of the Boston Massacre in trial and gets them off. They are not convicted of murder. They are found not guilty of the crime. So he had done an amazing job within the legal system to prove that the legal system worked. Still very British in 1770 when he manages to do that. And then you're talking about people like George Washington. George Washington, had he been called up by his friend Thomas Gage, who was the leader of the British soldiers in Boston, and asked to help out with the American Revolution and kind of keeping order, if you will, Washington probably would have signed up in 1770 had he been given the correct rank, at least of what he felt he deserved. So these folks are not Americans by any stretch, even at that point. So what pushes them over the edge? Well, you have to look at the Olive Branch Petition in July of 1775. Now, by that point, Lexington and Concord had already happened. Okay, so the British soldiers had marched out of Boston, marched into Lexington, fired on American militiamen there, killing 9, and then marching on to Concord, where they actually did have a pitched battle. And then, of course, marching back from Concord, they get picked off by people hiding behind every rock, tree, you name it. So by that point, Lexington and Concord have happened. There has been bloodshed. And the Olive Branch Petition is the last-ditch effort by the Second Continental Congress to make peace. And when you were reading through this, I was hoping that you would pick out a number of different things. First of all, they take great pains to talk about the late war, the French and Indian War, the most glorious and advantageous that ever had been carried out by British arms, your loyal colonists having contributed to its success by such repeated and strenuous exertions as frequently procured them the distinguished approbation of your majesty. So they're almost having revisionist history at this point, where they're talking about how, you know what, we served during the French and Indian War, we helped you win this conflict, and we are still very proud to be British. In the next paragraph, he says, while these recent and honorable acknowledgments of their merits remained on record in the journals and acts of that august legislature, the Parliament, undefaced by the imputations or even the suspicion of any offenses, they were alarmed by a new system of statutes and regulations adopted for the administration of the colonies that filled their minds with the most painful fears and jealousies, and to their inexpressible astonishment, perceived the danger of foreign quarrel quickly succeeded by domestic dangers in their judgment of a more dreadful kind, which is, of course, Old English. But what they're really talking about here in this, with the olive branch petition, they're looking at, what caused the Parliament, what caused them to all of a sudden turn on us. So who are they really blaming for all this? They're blaming the Parliament. They're saying, hey, the Parliament keeps putting these taxes on us. They keep taking these measures like the proclamation line. They keep taking these measures like the Boston Port Act. They've done all these terrible things that if you read the chapter and kind of kept up on things, they're talking about the intolerable acts at that point. The British called them the coercive acts. All that happened after the Boston Tea Party in 1773. By 1775, they're kind of saying, hey, look, all of this is water under the bridge if the king manages to finally kind of rein in his government. So they are kind of saying, hey, we beg you to understand that we're still loyal to you. They even finish it off, for such arrangements as your majesty's wisdom can form for collecting and uniting sense of your American people, we are convinced your majesty would receive such satisfaction proof of disposition in the colonists towards their sovereign. So we still like you. And look who is the guy that signs the whole thing, John Hancock. Okay, John Hancock, big signature. That's what he's famous for. He's the president of the Second Continental Congress. So even in 1775, they have shed blood. There has been American blood spilled in the American Revolution, and they're still writing a letter saying, hey, if you just kind of tell Parliament to back off and we start negotiating, I think we can find some common ground and be okay. And of course, the big push for the olive branch petition is by this guy right here, John Dickinson. John Dickinson from Pennsylvania is a very loyal colonist. He believes himself to be a proud British man. He does not like the connotation of being an American. He thinks that they're all proud British. He takes great pains to talk about that. And here's the thing, when Dickinson pushes for this, he truly believes that if they send this letter off to King George III will read it, realize that, hey, no harm, no foul, and he will kind of work with the colonists to resolve this issue. The problem is when this olive branch petition makes it over to England, King George III refuses to even open it because he's also receiving the dispatches and the reports about what happened at Lexington and Concord. And Lexington, had it just been Lexington, he probably would have been okay with it. He probably would have said, you know what, that was just a confusion. It happens. But the problem is when Concord happens, that was an actual pitched battle that even though the British technically won the battle and were able to accomplish their goal of destroying an arsenal there, walking back to Boston 2 by 2, dressed in red in the middle of the forest, which is always a bad idea, they end up getting picked off where 75 men are killed and about 300 are wounded on the way back. So they limp back into Boston. That is not okay, according to the king. So the king, when he receives this petition, doesn't even read it. He doesn't even open it, doesn't break the seal. He throws it back at his minister and says, I'm not reading anything from these rebels, which is a very unfortunate word to use, because when he labels them rebels, that's when the colonists start to really change their tune. If the king is declaring us to be in rebellion, then we are indeed in rebellion. Now, by that point in 1775, there are people that sign this document that are not on board with this. Benjamin Franklin, you'll notice right underneath John Dickinson's name, he's not really on board with this, but he goes along with the Congress with this. Caesar Rodney of Delaware, not on board with this. Both of them are very much on the side of independence. You know that the Adams family up in Massachusetts Bay here, Sam and John are absolutely against this olive branch petition, because by this point, both Adams are on the side of independence. Sam, of course, had been there from the very beginning. John, however, he is pushed over the edge by the punishments after the Boston Tea Party. When the Boston Tea Party happens, not only do they close the Boston Port Bill, or Boston Port under the Boston Port Bill, because of the coercive acts, but also in the coercive acts, they end the judicial system within Massachusetts, which John Adams says that is absolutely unfair. They take away trial by jury. Remember, he's the guy that defended the soldiers just 3 years prior to that in the Boston Massacre and got them off using that same judicial system. So he doesn't understand why the King of England had to say, and Parliament for that matter had to say, you know what, we can't trust the colonists to have courts. So because of that, John Adams then becomes a revolutionary. So even though they are against this document, they still sign it. Now, Thomas Jefferson also signs this document. Thomas Jefferson is not yet a full-blown patriot, but he is influenced by this guy up here, Patrick Henry, because remember, Patrick Henry is the one that very famously says, give me liberty or give me death, okay? And he is followed very closely by his protege, Richard Henry Lee. These two guys are the Virginians that are pushing the hardest for a revolutionary spirit, if you will. So Patrick Henry, Richard Henry Lee, those are actually the more vocal members of the delegation. Thomas Jefferson is young, and he doesn't say much at the Second Continental Congress, but he's going to become unbelievably important just 1 year later, when he is the one that is delegated to write the Declaration of Independence. So, of course, because that fails, the Declaration of Independence 1 year later becomes a reality. Now, the Declaration of Independence comes in 4 separate parts. Part 1 is the preamble, which is up here, starting off with the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. You'll notice the capitalization is always under scrutiny here. United States of America, states capitalized, America capitalized, united not so much. So even Jefferson was just kind of suggesting that we get along and that we are united in some way, shape, or form. Okay, and of course it starts, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Here's the deal. I can boil this down to one easy statement. What is Thomas Jefferson saying? Dear England, it's not you, it's me. I need some space to grow away from you. This is a breakup letter. That's all it is. Okay? It's officially breaking up with Great Britain. Okay? And now the second paragraph, it's going to go into the Enlightenment ideals of what we're really supposed to be fulfilling here. Okay? And this is, of course, the paragraph that has the most quoted lines from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, of course, where did we get that phraseology from? I've got at least half of the people in the Zoom call live here. Who does that sound like? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Oh, Flickinger would be so mad at you.
John Locke.
Matthias chiming in from home. John Locke. Thomas Jefferson is ripping off John Locke completely, okay? But that was totally fine because everybody knew who he was referencing. So he didn't feel like he needed to put a footnote or anything in there, okay? And of course, anyway, I think I'm going to disable the chat from now on. Guys, if you can't handle it, do realize I will write you up for it. Just telling you right now. So needless to say, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. That is also John Locke. Does anybody remember that theory, that you give up some of your rights to a government in exchange for protection, and if they fail to do that, you have the right to rebel? What was that theory called? It's an agreement that you discuss. What's another word for an agreement? A contract. And if I discuss it and we have an understanding about it, if we're discussing things, we are being what? Social. Put them together. Social contract theory. Okay? That there is a social contract between the governed and those that govern them. All right? So, of course, what is he saying? Hey, when one turns and starts to abuse their powers, if you will, you have the right to alter or abolish it. and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Now, has Jefferson at all said what this government's going to look like? No. So the whole point with this to understand is you have to differentiate between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Okay? They are not just 13 years separate from each other. Okay? The Declaration of Independence has one job: to let England know that we are breaking up with them and why. Okay? It is not setting up any government. Okay? That is not their purpose. They are merely saying, hey, we are no longer going to be part of your structure of government. But this is, again, a breakup letter with zero plan moving forward. Okay? I don't know what I want, but I know I don't want to be with you, and I'll figure it out from there. So we're breaking up with zero clue as to what to do moving forward. Jefferson's almost flat out admitting it. We don't know what we're going to do, but we're not going to do what you did, because what you did was wrong. Okay? So, prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms which they are accustomed. Translation: most people will sit around and suffer because it's just easier to do it that way. We have been suffering long enough. We've thought about it and we're done. Okay? So what is he doing? We've been anguished for a while now. You have done nothing to fix it, and so now we're leaving. All right? But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Hey, we've suffered long enough. Now it's our job to get rid of you. Okay? So this is all a product of the Enlightenment. This is all Enlightenment thought right here. Okay? So, such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies. We have been suffering patiently. Okay? The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of the absolute tyranny over these states. And tyranny is an important word. What happens to tyrants? They are overthrown. This is going back into British history. What happened to the king that ticked off the nation so much they went into a civil war? Charles I. He got his head chopped off. Okay? If you are a tyrant, you are capable of being overthrown. Now, is King George III a tyrant?
No.
In a weird way, is he really the root of all this problem? Now, Jefferson realizes he's got to then create an argument. Because let's be honest, who passed the Sugar Act? Parliament. Who passed the Stamp Act? Parliament. Who committed soldiers over to the colonies for protection? Parliament. Quartering Act. Parliament. Everything they've done has been through Parliament. Now, who could have stopped any number of those things? The king. And this is where they're going to point out, we sent you an olive branch petition. We told you, you could fix this. You could stop this. You didn't even open it. So we're done. And now they're going to blame everything on him. All right? This is, again, blaming somebody for the failure to administrate. Now, he's going to go through 27 different charges here. He has refused. He has forbidden. He has refused. He has called. He has dissolved. He has refused. He has endeavored. He has obstructed. Okay? He does he's going to blame him for all these things. Okay? And he goes through this very long list. And of course, what are the main things, if you had to boil it down, for those of you that read it, what are the main things they're complaining about? Go ahead, Chucky. Taxes. Taxes is in there. What else?
Government.
Okay. Specifically what in government?
Trial by jury.
Okay. Trial by jury, no representation, I heard.
Representation.
Okay. Got people typing in rights. Well, what rights? What are they taking away? Their freedom. Anything specific? Are they ever taking, do they ever accuse them of taking away their right to religion? No. What are some of these things? Okay, warrants, very good. The basis for most of our what eventually becomes Bill of Rights is all in here. Okay, Amendment 1, freedom of the press. Okay, Amendment 1, freedom of expression. Amendment 1, freedom of assembly. Okay, and freedom of petition. We wrote a petition. It's the Olive Branch petition. It was ignored. We assembled and you shot us. Okay, we tried to speak out and you threatened us as traitors. Okay, we write things and you threaten to shut down the newspapers, or sometimes you break them down completely and you arrest people. Those are all a violation of rights. Okay, weirdly enough, religion doesn't come up. Okay, Amendment 2, right to bear arms and right to be a militia. We've had militias disbanded. Amendment 3, right to no quartering. They've forced soldiers into people's houses before. Okay, Amendment 4, illegal search and seizure. Okay, so literally our declaration helps James Madison down the way to write our Bill of Rights. Okay, because Amendment 5, 6, and 7 are all about criminal and civil trials. If you go through, there's all kinds of issues with criminal and civil trials in here. So in a weird way, when people say this does set up the government in some way, shape, or form, they're not wrong in the fact that they are establishing rights and freedoms, because what they're complaining the king took away, we are then going to have to certify in our form of government. Okay, so keep in mind, this is going to come back up, that when we are writing the Constitution in just 13 years later, a group known as the Anti-Federalists are going to keep on referring back to this document and say, hey, we complained that the king violated this, and now you're making a government that's going to do the same thing. We need assurances that that's not going to happen. Okay? Now, after all that, he then wraps it up by saying, in every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress. So we've tried, we've reached out, we've done everything we need to do, and you haven't done a thing. And of course, they finish it off. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, again, notice the capitalization, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. You'll notice I would point out that united was capitalized when he talked about colonies. It's a minor thing that historians have debated for a very long time. Did he mean that the states were rebelling to be a unified group of people? Or did he mean that the colonies were unified to fight, but then after that, they were going to break off and do their own thing? A lot of people have thought that Jefferson intended that there would be 13 separate countries. And in many cases, many of these representatives felt that way, that South Carolina was their home, and they didn't care what happened in Massachusetts. You know, that these were going to be separate countries, okay? So there's no guarantee that this is how, you know, the way we turned out is how we needed to be, okay? And of course, this then absolves them to all allegiance to the British crown. You'll notice it also says establish commerce. Commerce is another word for trade. So keep in mind, we are not just rebelling politically, we are rebelling economically. Now, who are we going to be able to trade with? Everybody, whoever you want. Doesn't have to be Great Britain, okay? And so, of course, the line that I always find interesting is the last one. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. You need to understand what these people are risking, all right? Every single person that's listed under here that has signed this document is risking three things, okay? Their lives, that's pretty simple to understand. What's going to happen if these guys get caught? They're traitors. What's going to happen? They're going to be hanged. They're going to be drawn and quartered. Okay? If you've ever watched the movie National Treasure, they do take great pains to talk about what's going to happen to them. Okay? If these guys get caught, they're going to be strung up, they're going to be pulled, they're going to be cut open, their insides are going to be pulled out and burned. They're going to do all that to these guys as a message to everybody else that if you rise up against the King of England, this is what's going to happen to you. At the very least, they're going to at least be hanged, okay? Ben Franklin even says when this is signed, we must all hang together now, or we most assuredly will hang separately, okay? Which is typical Ben Franklin dark humor, play on words type humor, okay? But bottom line is they're not wrong. He's not wrong with that statement. These guys are literally signing their lives away. But what are they also losing? Every one of these guys owns a lot of money. Like they've got a lot of money, property, they've got huge houses. These are not poor people. These are people that have huge estates. Thomas Jefferson has a huge plantation. You know, probably one of the poorest people at that Congress is John Adams, okay? John Adams has a family farm up in Massachusetts and a law practice that he hadn't been really working at for quite some time. So he was probably one of the poorest people, okay? But they are risking everything they own and everything their family owns, because if they get hanged, not only are their kids going to get thrown out in the street, you know, like they're going to lose everything. Their wives are going to be destitute, all right? They know that. And then the last one, which is so important to them, their sacred honor. Okay? What does that mean? Your reputation. It's so important to these guys. They want to be remembered well. Think about how they're remembered now. Ben Franklin, George Washington, you know, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson. These people are held up. I mean, they're on the front cover of our civics books. These guys established a nation. You know, you go to any political rally, they're going to be quoting these guys. Okay? Why? They're the foundation of our republic. What happens if they lose? Are we talking about them at all? No. They're forgotten. They're spat upon. There's no, look, if I go down to Monticello and I tour around, Thomas Jefferson is buried on Monticello's property. If I walk around Mount Vernon, where George Washington lived, his mausoleum is there. You know, you can go visit their grave, and it's huge. Okay, people make pilgrimages to go and see these graves, if you will. We wouldn't have known where they were buried. They would have been burned and thrown into the far corners of the English realm had they lost. Okay, so you're talking about not just risking your lives, you're risking everything you've ever worked for and everything you've ever been known as. Okay, these guys would not be talked about at all. And if they were, they'd be spitting, you know, these horrible human beings. Okay, so they're risking a ton. You have to understand that. So when we pick on them, and rightfully so, when we pick on them for things like women's rights or slavery or things like that, when we are establishing this country, you have every right to question them on that. But at the same time, they're risking a ton just to do what they did. Okay? So bottom line is Declaration of Independence gets us our freedom, if you will. Okay? At least, and anybody know, by the way, we're writing it not just to break up with King George III. We're also going to send it to somebody else. Anybody know who else we send a copy of this to?
The French.
Matthias chiming in again. The French. I was going to guess that. Okay. Why? We want them as an ally. The strange thing is what type of government do the French have? They also have a monarchy.
Monarchy.
They also have a monarchy. So we're complaining about a king to another king. The only nice thing is that king doesn't like the other king. So, you know, hey, we lost a war to them back during the French and Indian War. We lost Canada. We lost some other things. We'd like to get it back. This seems like a good opportunity here, you know. So they're going to look, and look, historically, on the long term, it's a bad idea for the King of France to get involved in this. But in the short term, man, he'd love to stick it to the British. He'd love to have that opportunity. And the American colonists are going to try so hard. And do realize, at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, there is no French support. The French had declared neutrality at that point. It takes 2 years for us to get the French involved. and really another year and a half before they show up. Okay, and at least big enough numbers to be helpful. Okay, so at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, nothing is sure. In fact, we were losing at the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Okay, Battle of Long Island is going to happen, and the Battle of New York is going to happen, and both of them are going to be embarrassing for Washington. In fact, Washington is very good at running away. That's his main skill. Okay, weirdly enough, he's known for being the guy that retreats better than anybody in the world. Okay, even the British actually compliment him on his ability to get away. Because Long Island, he was boxed in, fog kind of rolled in. He used the fog to get across the East River, using Maryland fishermen as kind of their navy, if you will. They didn't have a navy, but they had some fishermen that figured out how to row them across the river. And then when they fought in Manhattan, up in Harlem Heights, they barely got away again and had to go across the Hudson. And again, very fortuitously, a bank of fog came in the night that they had to escape. And every morning they woke up, the British would wake up thinking, all right, we're going to finish them off today, and they'd just be gone. Okay, and Washington was so good at it, he would have them strike up fires and everything, have campfires going and keep them going as they were retreating. So the British would be like, oh, look, they've got campfires. They're all cooking their evening meal or something. Tomorrow we're going to go kill them. And then they wake up in the morning and all the campfires were all burned out and the whole place was deserted. Washington was very good at running away. Honestly, they always viewed it as kind of like, well, God must be on our side because anytime we need to run away, God gives us some fog. Never mind that New York always has fog. It's a fairly common occurrence at that point. But again, if it was a clear night, Washington would have been caught, and that would have been the end of the American Revolution, most likely. Now, of course, we move on to Abigail. The main thing that you needed to gain out of Abigail was her admonishment to her husband. Okay, this is widely considered to be the first document in American history showing feminism. Okay, I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire that you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power in the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. Okay? Remember the ladies, and all men would be tyrants if they could. Those were often quoted lines by feminists saying that that's the root cause or roots of American feminism. Okay? Now, is Abigail Adams the first feminist? Folks, if you read her letters, she's pretty outspoken. But the most important thing is John absolutely encourages that. John loves Abigail more. I would argue they have the best relationship out of any of the founding fathers because he truly views his wife as his intellectual equal. Okay? He truly does. He reads her his speeches before he ever presents them to Congress. Anytime he writes a letter home to her, it's weird. It always starts off with how's the family, how are the kids, how's the farm? Then it goes on to here's what we're doing in Congress. Then it's here's what I'm doing in Congress. What do you think? And then it always finishes off with something dirty. Because even in his 30s and 40s, he was still very much missing his wife. Abigail would always write back, the kids are doing well, or the kids have smallpox because she made the decision on her own to vaccinate her children. John Adams said no. She said, well, I'm living with them. Guess what? So she made the choice to do that. Because you ain't here, I'm in charge. Okay? She also fired, there was a guy that worked for the farm who was a loyalist, and he was really talking badly about, oh, these colonists need to understand their place. She fired him. Adams said, we can't run the farm without him. And she wrote back basically, well, it's still working with me in charge, so I guess I'll just employ myself. Okay? She's one of those people, I'm going to do it my way, and Adams and her butt heads all the time. But they really honestly respect each other. Okay? John Adams, again, like George Washington and Martha had a very loving relationship, but he never relied on Martha for anything more than, how are things at home? Like he didn't really, ask her opinion on anything. Thomas Jefferson never did with his wife. None of these guys really ever wrote home to their wives to ask about their opinion. John always does. And even when he doesn't ask for it, Abby gives it. Okay? She doesn't care. She'll tell him. And look, Abby is cold-blooded. Okay? One minor little thing about Abby to give you an idea of how she thinks. We're going to study the Revolution of 1800 when Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, who were close friends at this point, they are very close friends during the Declaration, and moving forward, they're going to serve together as diplomats over in France. Abigail's going to get to know Thomas Jefferson real well. They're going to be friends too. They have a falling out during the election because Thomas Jefferson says really nasty things about John Adams, okay? And writes really nasty things to the newspaper, where Abigail knows his writing style well enough that even though it's got a pseudonym, she knows it's Thomas Jefferson that wrote the letter. And she never forgives him, ever. And she basically tells her husband, we're done with him. We're never talking to him again, okay? So Jefferson wins the election, but Abigail says, we're not helping him, and don't you dare. If he reaches out, don't you dare write back. Well, at one point, Jefferson's daughter passes away, okay? Jefferson's daughter passes away. Abigail had helped to raise her when she was over in France with Thomas Jefferson. So she wrote a letter of condolence to Thomas Jefferson, talking about how her heart hurt, that he had gone through this pain, he had gone through this loss. And really, my heart goes out to you and my prayers are with you. Jefferson writes back this very thoughtful, oh my goodness, I'm so glad, it does my heart well to hear from you, and oh, thank goodness that we can let things go, and I've been longing for this for so long. And then she writes back and goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. I was just sad to hear your daughter died. Don't assume that we're friends now. I think you read this wrong. Like, it was just very cold. Like, we're not friends. I'm just sorry you had to go through that. Okay? When Abby dies, John Adams writes Thomas Jefferson a letter right afterwards to say, well, now that my wife has died, I think I can write to you safely now. So needless to say, out of all the founders, John and Abigail, and look, my wife loves those Nicholas Sparks novels, where somebody always dies and they're really sappy. I think Nicholas Sparks really should look into writing the true story of John and Abigail. Because the dumbest story I can tell you about John and Abigail, John goes over to France to serve as foreign minister. Abigail is afraid of the ocean. Even though she lives on the ocean, she's scared to death of ships and will not go across the ocean. He keeps writing letters, please come over. I miss you so much. Please come over. And the only reason he finally gets her, because John Quincy Adams, his son, had come over with him to be his secretary. And so he writes and says, hey, I want you to come over and visit because, your son misses you. So she's like, oh man, you had to bring that up. So she makes the crossing, which was not easy. She gets to Paris. John Adams is in the middle of a meeting, hears that his wife has come into Paris, okay? Once he hears that, he abruptly leaves the meeting, goes to the hotel. She's hugging her son, okay? He pushes John Quincy aside, says, go play, grabs his wife by the hand, runs upstairs, puts a note on the door for the bellman that, bring the bags up in an hour and a half. Bellman brings up all the bags after an hour and a half, and there's another note taped on the door that basically says, give me another hour. Whoa. At the time, they were 44 years old. Well, he missed her a great deal. What do you want? He remembered the ladies. Don't worry. We'll explain at some point, Randy. Don't worry. Now, John Adams here, this last little bit, letter to Hezekiah Niles. This quote right here, the revolution is in the hearts and minds of the people, is the main thing, okay? Now, this is going to be part of your Flipgrid assignment. What? Yes, Flipgrid, okay? This is your question right here. Was the revolution the actual warfare between the British and the Americans, or was it more of a rebellion of thought against the political and economic realities of the time? That's the first question. The second part, what event, document, or leader would have convinced you to rebel against British authority if you had been a colonist in the 1760s and 70s? Or would you have been a loyalist or neutral? And explain. Now, you may have to go back and watch my lecture telling you step by step how the American Revolution came into being in order to do this. You may also have to watch the other lecture that I'm going to record and post by Friday, tomorrow, okay, on the actual American Revolution. Okay, that's part of your coursework for the week. I need you to have this Flipgrid done, the initial filming of this done by Monday, and then you are going to respond to 2 of your classmates by Wednesday, okay? You can respond just by typing. You don't have to actually have a video response, okay? If you find a video response easier, then fine, whatever, okay? But you're going to do this part. That's part of your homework. And then chapter 9. Chapter 9. There will be a quiz on Monday, open all day on Monday. You have to have chapter 9 read by Monday. I know, I'm trying. So, to recap, Flipgrid. The first initial video due on Monday, as is a quiz on Monday over chapter 9. Then, of course, the responses due by Wednesday on the American Revolution. Okay, so you're going to watch at least 2 of your fellow classmates' videos and respond to them. And the responses should be academic, not, I like the picture. Well done. Your hair looks nice. Okay? It needs to be something about their video. You either disagree with their argument, or you don't understand what they're saying about this, or I disagree with you, or whatever else. Okay? Yeah, and be nice to Megan. She's sensitive. You can mean to Chucky, though. That's fine. All right, folks. Any questions, comments, concerns? We're coming up on lunch, so I don't want to. Folks at home, enjoy your lunch, whatever it may be, but the people here want to get to lunch, so I'm going to start sharing. And if you have any questions, obviously, people at school, you can ask me. People at home, give me an email. Lauren, we don't miss you.